Welcome to episode 2 of the Suppress Herald. And we got our first episode out there and talking about what this is all about. So, just to quick repeat, this is about local news and what's happening across the country where there are organizations, one in particular, that are buying up local newspapers and consolidating our news into control by a small group of people, mostly tech billionaires. And the National Trust for Local News is at the head of that. And here in Maine, it's kind of interesting because all of a sudden, some other outlets and some other people are paying attention and starting to write about and talk about the fact that the entire network of newspapers here in Maine was bought out by this organization with a few key people. The Democracy Fund is really driving the National Trust for Local News. A guy named Pierre Omidyar, the founder of eBay, one billionaire, has been the principal in that. And Bill Gates and the Gates Family Foundation is also a funder of the National Trust for Local News, as well as the Open Society Foundations and George Soros. Now, Alex Soros' son is taken over and spending billions of dollars to try to run our lives very, very simply. So I just wanted to have a little bit of expansion of that conversation. You know, if you go, this is happening in plain sight. You go to the website of that national organization that is buying up newspapers and our media and buying control of the message. It's right in plain sight. You can read some of the press and some of the releases and talking about the Record Chronicle, which is a Denton Record Chronicle in Dallas Fort Worth area, serves about 1 million people. They bought that newspaper and they're taking that over, and what you're going to see is very similar content to what we see here in Maine, which will be very interesting. It's supposed to be local news, and there's no question that the angle is going to be to support their views and suppress, which is why I call this the Suppress Herald, the views of a lot of Americans. And there's also the Colorado News Conservancy in suburban Denver that's bought a bunch of papers there, and that's all also on the website at the National Trust for Local News. So they're starting to go across the country and consolidate local news. And as I've said many times, politics is local, and so is propaganda. And that's what's happening. So today's episode, we want to spend a little bit of time with one of the major conversations that are happening across the country. And I want to get some local, expose the local propaganda that's happening with immigration. Immigration is just a huge story because we have open borders. We're being overrun. The mayor of New York City is now crying foul and saying he needs help and he needs billions of dollars. It's bankrupting the city of New York. They're taking up, literally, I've heard up to 50% of the hotel rooms in New York are being taken up by illegal immigrants. And I'm not going to call them asylum seekers. I'm going to call them what they are. They're illegal immigrants. They came here without doing it properly at the border. They streamed across the border. They were given their asylum hearings. And let's be clear, asylum is a definition. You have to be fleeing, fear for your life. There are details of that. And anywhere from 90 to 95% of asylum seekers, when they get in front of a judge and have their cases heard, are found to be here illegally and are typically deported, or should be. But they've figured out, and this has been common knowledge across the globe, literally, that if you just claim that you're an asylum seeker, they'll let you in, They'll release you into the country and you can disappear for 2 or 3 years before you even have a court date. They have children. Now they have anchors here. Now they can't be deported. And this is just a scam. And I think it was a scam that was put in place by open borders people between the national organizations that are looking for cheap labor, Democrats looking for voters, and others looking to just destroy our country. So it's really a major problem that's rearing its head now. And I just wanted to share a little bit of some research or following of this in the local paper. So this is just local media in Maine. And this started back, we had a whole 1 week series back. This is May 23rd. This is first paper of the week. And they had a series in the Portland Suppress Herald called Long Way Home. And I'll just read the titles for these daily front page articles that appeared in the paper for a week. Long Way Home, Seeking Asylum in Maine, Seeking Asylum in Maine. Welcome to Safety Land. Asylum seekers say they are drawn to Maine because of its peacefulness, resources, and sense of community. Yeah, peacefulness, resources is primary. We put them up in hotels. There were literally 8-10 hotels fully occupied by asylum seekers in Maine. And what you don't hear, this is puff pieces about how wonderful all the immigrants are. And it's a whole front page story that goes on and has a major section inside the paper as well. This is a 2-page video, full 2-page with pictures and showing you how just wonderful all these asylum seekers are. That was the beginning of the week. That was Tuesday. And then you had an insert, an entire section with telling about this whole really great sessions they're going to have. And they had a live discussion with the Suppress Herald talking about how wonderful all the immigration is. And that's a full page spread on the 23rd of May. On the 24th of May, you have Long Way Home, Wandering a New World. Asylum seekers new to Portland spend much time navigating red tape and waiting for hearings, work permits, English classes, and a place to call home. And another puff piece and how wonderful everything is. Then you've got Thursday, front page, another 2-page spread inside with the entire story, pictures showing you how wonderful everything is with all of these illegal immigrants. Long way home. Many people who arrived in Maine long before the current wave of asylum seekers are still waiting for their cases to be heard. And success is not at all guaranteed. No, success is actually almost assured to be not allowed because most of them don't qualify as asylum seekers. Then you have Friday, same week, Long Way Home. What can Maine do? State leaders and residents are far from unified on how much Maine can afford to spend to support asylum seekers and how much responsibility it has to do so. Why isn't there state coordination? Yeah, it's propaganda. All you see is how wonderful it is. And then you have in the Saturday paper, so this went on for an entire week, every day, front page. They made it here. Slowly and painstakingly, asylum seekers from African nations build new lives in Maine and often find ways to help those who arrive after them. Yeah, it's called chain migration. It's called never ending. It's called a magnet to have people come. And nowhere in these papers is there a discussion about the impacts of all of this. the overwhelming of the schools. You have a situation where students are not learning in classrooms because you've got 17 different language speakers flooding into the schools by hundreds, if not thousands, in local schools. And how can you possibly put those people from away who don't speak English in large quantities, 20, 30% of classrooms or more, with people that don't speak English and expect the teacher to be able to teach that class? Nobody is learning in these schools. The other thing is, and once in a while, a little bit of journalism slips in, and talking about the budget in Portland, Maine earlier this year, it slipped out that, they had added to the budget $1 million in additional, this is additional funding for English as a second language teachers. In other words, they need translators to handle all of these people. That was additional. That doesn't count the significant number and significant cost that was already there. They keep having to add to it because this influx never stops here in Maine, and it's happening across the entire country. And nowhere in these papers did they talk about the negative consequences of all of this. Everything's great, and what I'd like to say is this is like, if you say anything bad about asylum seekers, illegal immigrants, even using the term illegal immigrants, you're ridiculed, you're attacked, and I probably will be. The problem is that you're going to have a lot of good people and you're going to have bad people because we have open borders and these people are streaming in and we're not checking them. We just take come one, come all. And we're seeing crime. We're seeing all sorts of problems. We're also seeing homelessness in 10 cities exploding across the country. And you can't add 8 million illegals a year and expect that they're going to be found housing and food and all of the rest of it without significant impact on society. We're being overrun. This is not assimilation, which is how immigration should be accomplished, through assimilating people at a scale that you can handle. And what we've done is we've overwhelmed the system, and it's a real serious problem. And nowhere in these papers do we talk about that. You've got a lot of issues, and those are ignored by the papers. All you have is a whole week of puff pieces talking about how wonderful it all is. A comparison I would make is water is life. We need water to live. You can also drown in it. So water's great, but too much water will drown you. Immigration's great for our country. Too much immigration and we're drowning. And nobody wants to talk about that. It's a real serious problem. And we just can't go on. And what we've got in these local papers is just, don't believe your lying eyes. This is wonderful. Nothing but good things. So that's how I wanted to start today's episode. We're really in a situation where you look locally at these papers, you look at the media, and they're just covering this up. But it's gotten so bad now. You've got Mayor Adams in New York City screaming from the rooftops, we are overwhelmed. We need help. We have to stop this. Our city is not going to come back from this. And it is. New York City is a disaster. And it's across the country. You look at California, and it's the whole state is crashing. The whole state is becoming a third world state. And a big part of that is just unrestricted immigration. And so you got the Nancy Pelosi's hiding behind walls, and you've got the rest of the population out there living on the streets. Nobody can afford houses out there, and homelessness, and yet the borders remain open and they continue to stream in. A quick story on this that I'd just like to share. This is a personal story. When I was in a previous life traveling to Europe on a regular basis, I worked for a Swiss company and we had offices in Holland. I was coming back, returning from the Netherlands to the States through Schiphol Airport, going through customs and immigration. And there was a small group of teenagers in front of me in line to go through immigration. And they were English speaking. I think they were, you know, from an African country that was an English country because they were all fluently speaking English. So I could listen in. And this conversation, this is verbatim. They were discussing where they would like to live if they had any choice, if they could live anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, where would you go? And this one kind of, you know, leader of this group is he was late teens, teenager, said, and this is verbatim, if I could live anywhere in the world, I'd go to San Francisco because there the government gives you everything and you can live like a king. Quote verbatim, exactly what he said. I'll never forget it. That was in the 90s when I was traveling to Europe on a regular basis. So this is somebody from a faraway country in Europe, knew San Francisco, you could go there. The government would give you everything and you can live like a king. That was what the message was to the world. And that's not changed. So we should not be surprised that we are being overrun unless you have borders, unless you have border security, unless you have consequences for people that come here illegally. And that's, we have just being overrun. And meanwhile, our local newspaper is telling us not to believe our lying eyes every day with this media. And it continues. You look at the letters to the editor, you look at all the editorial content. It's just crazy. And it never ends. So we have a problem, and the propaganda machine is in overtime trying to prevent us from believing the truth on what's going on. Immigration in this country is a complete and utter disaster, and it's going to literally take our country down if we don't address it. So that's a big part of what we're seeing in the papers and what we're tracking and looking at. I just wanted to bring you up to date on my continuing look at what's happening with the media as far as the editorial page locally. I spoke in episode 1 about tracking the editorial page on what's liberal editors are going through and picking these letters to be published. So you've got liberal letters to the editor, you've got conservative letters to the editor, and you've got what I call neutral letters to the editor. And, the score this week through the end of, through Sunday of last week when I tracked this, 26 liberal, 5 conservative, 17 neutral. So again, it's very consistent. If I look down through, it's pretty much 5-1 liberal letters versus conservative letters. On July 31st, basically that week, August 1st, the National Trust for Local News, through the Maine Trust for Local News, took over the newspapers. And I said, well, okay, let's keep an eye on it. I'll make a note there that that's when the newspapers changed hands and see if anything changes. And absolutely nothing has changed. The week after they took over the newspaper, it was 30 liberal letters to the editor, 3 conservative, 10-1, and 13 neutral. And the following week, 30 liberal letters to the editor, 2 conservative letters were published in an entire week and 14 neutral letters. So this trend continues, if not getting worse, and we don't expect that it will change anytime soon. And so that just gives you an idea. Maine is a pretty, almost a purple state. Southern Maine and the Maine area between Portland and Augusta are a blue state, but a good part of the rest of the state is either red or neutral. And yet the newspapers do not reflect that in any way, shape, or form. And now again are owned by one organization run by tech billionaires running our newspapers and telling us what to think. Meanwhile, I'll read you a couple of what I consider neutral editorial or letters to the editor, just to give you some insight into, there are, I'm sure, good letters expressing opinion about things going on in Maine that are from people that are more on the conservative side, but those aren't getting published. But what do are things like, this letter to the editor: Starbucks can't expect us to take it seriously. And it's talking about an Associated Press story carried by the Press Herald last Saturday, which is typical Associated Press, Washington Post stories, liberal news, national newspapers with articles being published locally. Talks about as Starbucks aims for greater sustainability, will customers go along? Was an underwhelming puff piece on Starbucks' effort to improve sustainability. And this person goes on to talk about, Starbucks being a greenwashing basically, and suggests things like, how about abolishing the drive up window so folks have to get out of the car and get a bit of exercise by walking into the shop to order? This would definitely be a step in the right direction for the environment. No cars spewing CO2 and other gases into the air while waiting for coffee. What a novel idea. Another step would be to take a look at the ridiculous caloric nightmares they serve as coffee that contribute to adult obesity and the related conditions, including heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers. Does Starbucks have the will to help? In other words, this person is more than happy to tell us what we can eat, what we can drive, and how we should live our lives. And that gets published, and it's the most ridiculous news editorial I've read in a while. Although this one would probably take the cake. This one is just the best. this actually made it through the editorial office at the Suppress Herald. Obituaries don't reflect our entire community. I find the obituary section of the Portland Press Herald oddly missing whole elements of our population. The Portland area has a significant immigrant population and has had for a good while. Do they not die? Their life stories can be compelling, but their deaths do not regularly feature. If they were, we all might gain in respect for these new members of our community and their families. In other words, there aren't enough minority obituaries in the paper. Well, the paper doesn't, it's people pay for obituaries, and if they want to pay it and put it in, then it's fine. But to say that, blame the paper for not having enough minority obituaries in the paper, is the most specious and stupid thing that could be written. And yet that, in the editorial department at the Suppress Herald, took priority over a letter stating the obvious, that immigration is overrunning us here in Maine, which I'm sure they have those letters on a weekly basis, but never get printed, and other issues that we're seeing that are just ignored by the editorial department at the Suppress Herald. They'd rather print these inane and stupid letters to the editor about how the obituaries are racist. I don't know where we're headed, but it's not in a good place. So that's a little bit of insight on the editorial content at these papers and how influential that can be. And you have to realize, people just read through, they don't bother to do what I do. I'll never forget addressing this with the editorial director for the editorial page when I said that, I had actually graded them on their liberal versus conservative viewpoint on the editorial page. And her response was, gee, nobody's ever done that. I've never seen that before. Well, of course not. So the Suppress Herald continues. It's doing what they do and have done for a very long time. And now they're owned by tech billionaires. And we can expect more of the same or worse. Another trend that I'm seeing in the paper is we're starting to see the articles with President Biden having his problems with basically the Biden crime family and their foreign money mucking for foreign money to for vice president at the time Biden to fix things for foreigners, China, Ukraine, and Hunter Biden being indicted finally for gun charges. And it's kind of interesting, the this paper has put editorialized on and on and on for gun control. Hunter Biden gets charged with gun charges, basically lying on a application to get a permit and saying, lying that he did not do drugs. And the problem is he wrote a book saying he did. And so they also, when he got that handgun, disposed of it in a dumpster or in a trash can. And all that is a no-no. But here's an article in the Suppress Herald. Hunter Biden charges wade into Supreme Court fray over guns. His lawyers say recent court rulings support their view that a law barring drug users from possessing a gun violates the Second Amendment. I thought nobody should be able to possess a gun. That's their view. But when it comes to Hunter Biden being charged, now we're going to pull up and dredge up these potential caveats that, he should not be charged for this. This should not be a situation with Hunter Biden. I can tell you if it was a conservative or a conservative politician's son, if that was President Trump's, one of his sons, we wouldn't see that article in the paper. They'd be throw the book at him and he should go to jail for 10 years for lying about drug use for a gun permit. I can guarantee that. And then you have also the whole circle the wagons happening with the editorials and articles in the Suppress Herald regarding the whole Biden mess further. And this is a September 24th headline in the World Nation section of the paper. Biden allies seize on impeachment as a weapon against Republicans. They are tapping a team of 24 White House aides to paint the House impeachment effort as an evidence-free political stunt that exposes the disarray in the Republican Party. Evidence-free. I don't need to go there. I don't need to talk about it because anybody that's got any kind of sense of what's going on and with their eyes at least a little cracked open knows there's a abundance of evidence that what Joe Biden was doing with his son Hunter regarding getting money from Chinese energy company, from Ukraine, a Burisma, the energy company in Ukraine, getting a prosecutor fired. And now we're going to find out if that money flowed into his account because they're going to be able to track that and they're starting to find it. They just found that money came from China was directed into a bank account that was tied to Joe Biden's home address. So, no evidence, saying there's no evidence is the most specious, stupid thing going. And yet, this newspaper is willing to print this article and make the case. Basically, this is the defense team making the case that nothing to see here. Biden's just, out there, and his son was making some money and everything's cool. Not at all to most people. I think he sold out the country. I think he committed treason as the vice president, changing foreign policy to suit, well, to personally benefit financially is as simple as it gets on selling out the country as a politician. So that's what we see. We see this, the Suppress Herald just continually on and on. One side, bury it, suppress it, don't talk about it, ignore it. The other side, attack and just show one-sided approach to the news, to what's happening around us. And again, basically, it's these articles and these letters to the editor, basically saying to Americans, don't believe your lying eyes. What you see is not true. All these immigrants are great people, and they're going to benefit the country. And Joe Biden never did anything wrong. That's what we're supposed to believe this week. And once again, evidence that what's happening locally in the media should be very concerning to all Americans, especially right here in Maine, where I live, where the newspaper's have been taken over across the entire state by an organization funded by tech billionaires with an agenda that want to control the narrative and want to control us. So with that, thanks for listening. Just remember, politics is local, and so is propaganda.